I always thought my life was a steady rhythm, like the hum of a well-tuned engine. My name's Daniel, and for 16 years, I'd built a world with Claire. My wife, my anchor. We had a house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, and a daughter, Emily, who just turned 13. I worked long hours as a structural engineer, designing bridges that could withstand storms, while Claire managed a boutique downtown, curating vintage dresses and handmade jewelry. Our days were predictable, comfortable, a quiet dance of routine. Mornings began with coffee and her soft smile across the table. Evenings ended with us on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched some forgettable show. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then came the shift. It was subtle at first, like a hairline crack in concrete. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Claire started staying late at the boutique, claiming shipments were delayed or customers demanded custom orders. I didn't question it. I trusted her. She'd always been meticulous, a perfectionist with a laugh that could melt tension. But the late nights stretched into weeks, and her excuses grew thinner. She'd come home with her hair slightly mussed, her lipstick faded, her eyes darting away when I asked how her day went. I chalked it up to stress. Running a small business wasn't easy. I'd nod, kiss her forehead, and let it slide. One Tuesday, though, the crack widened. I'd finished a project early and decided to surprise her at the shop with takeout, her favorite Thai curry. The boutique's lights were off when I arrived, the closed sign dangling crookedly in the window. My stomach twisted. She'd texted me an hour ago, saying she'd be there until 9. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. I stood there, food cooling in my hands, the streetlights casting long shadows across the empty sidewalk. Something gnawed at me, a quiet instinct I couldn't name. I drove home, telling myself she'd gone to a friend's or stopped for groceries. But when she slipped through the door at midnight, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, her explanation, "I was with a supplier," rang hollow. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I'm a patient man, methodical. Bridges don't collapse from one weak beam. They fail when the load exceeds the design. I needed evidence, not suspicion. So I watched. Her phone became a third presence in our marriage, always angled away from me, buzzing at odd hours. She'd smile at the screen, then tuck it into her pocket when I walked into the room. I started waking up before her, checking the laundry for clues, receipts, unfamiliar scents, anything. One morning, I found a folded note in her coat pocket. Asterisk, same time, same place. You're unforgettable. Asterisk, no signature, just sharp, slanted handwriting that wasn't mine. My chest tightened, but I folded it back, said nothing. The real blow came a week later. Emily had a school play, and Claire promised she'd be there. I sat in the auditorium, saving her a seat, scanning the crowd as kids in lopsided costumes shuffled on stage. Emily waved at me from the stage, her grin wide under the lights. Claire never showed. Afterward, she texted, asterisk, got held up at the shop. So sorry. Asterisk, I drove home with Emily, her disappointment heavier than my own. That night, Claire stumbled in at 2 a.m., her blouse wrinkled, her breath sharp with wine. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the note's words burning behind my eyes. Unforgettable. She was slipping away, and I was starting to see the shape of the storm. The next morning, I decided to act. Doubt had festered long enough. I needed certainty. Claire was still asleep when I left for work. Her hair spilled across the pillow like a dark halo. I kissed Emily goodbye at the bus stop, then drove past my office, circling back toward the boutique. It wasn't open yet, but I parked across the street, hidden behind a delivery van. I don't know what I expected, maybe nothing, maybe everything. An hour passed, then 2. My coffee went cold, and my hands cramped around the steering wheel. Just as I was about to give up, a black sedan pulled up. Claire stepped out, laughing, her arm brushing against a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that looked carved from stone. They disappeared into the shop together. I sat there, numb. The world tilted, but I didn't move. When they emerged an hour later, he touched her lower back, guiding her to his car. She didn't pull away. They drove off and I followed, keeping my distance. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. Late nights, that note, her evasions. The sedan led me to a quiet street on the edge of town, stopping at a brick house with ivy climbing the walls. They went inside, the door closing with a finality that echoed in my skull. I parked a block away, staring at the house until my eyes burned. 2 hours later, she came out, smoothing her skirt, her lips curved in a private smile. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a motel, claiming a late meeting to Emily over the phone. The room smelled of bleach and regret, but I needed space to think. Who was he? How long had this been happening? I opened my laptop and started digging. Claire's social media was a curated lie. Photos of us at Emily's birthday, captions about family forever. But her boutique's page had new followers. One standing out, Michael Voss. A quick search revealed he was a photographer, mid-40s, with a portfolio of moody landscapes and a smug profile picture. His posts were sparse, but a comment on Claire's shop update, stunning work, as always, felt like a taunt. I cross-referenced his name with local records. He owned that brick house, divorced, no kids, a reputation for charm. I pictured him with Claire, their laughter behind closed doors, and my hands shook. But I wasn't ready to confront her. I needed more. The next day, I rented a small camera, the kind contractors use to inspect tight spaces. I hid it in the boutique's back room, tucked behind a shelf of fabric bolts. It was a risk, but I had to know. That night, Claire came home humming, her cheeks flushed. I asked about her day, and she waved it off, busy as usual. I nodded, swallowing the bile in my throat. The footage came the next evening. I'd synced the camera to my phone, and after Emily went to bed, I watched. Claire and Michael, in the back room, their hands roaming, their mouths close. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was deliberate, familiar, like they'd done this 100 times. She giggled as he whispered something, her fingers tracing his chest. My stomach churned, but I kept watching, memorizing every frame. When it ended, I sat in the dark, the silence pressing against me. She'd betrayed me, us, with a casual ease that cut deeper than any lie. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man with a purpose. The days after the footage felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, work, dinner with Emily, small talk with Claire. But inside, I was a furnace, slow burning, waiting to erupt. I didn't confront her yet. That would have been too easy. She didn't deserve a quick release, a tearful apology to wipe the slate clean. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to unravel her world as methodically as she'd unraveled mine. I started planning, piecing together a revenge that would linger, that would haunt her long after I was gone from her life. First, I studied Michael Voss. He wasn't just a fling, he was a fixture. His photography business was modest but growing, propped up by a small inheritance and a network of artsy types who fawned over his vision. I found his clients, his bookings, his habits. He drank espresso at a cafe near his house every morning, lingered there with a notebook like some pretentious poet. I went once, sat in the corner, watched him charm the barista with a grin I wanted to smash. He didn't know me, didn't know the storm I was brewing. That was my advantage. Claire, meanwhile, kept up her charade. She'd kiss me goodbye each morning, her lips cool against mine, then vanish into her secret life. I let her think I was blind, playing the dutiful husband while I gathered ammunition. I cloned her phone one night while she slept, using a trick I'd found online, simple software, a USB cable, and her passcode I'd guessed months ago, Emily's birthday. Her texts with Michael were a gut punch. Can't wait to see you. Last night was unforgettable. Asterisk, he suspects nothing. Asterisk, she'd even sent him a photo of herself in lingerie I'd bought her. Captioned, asterisk, for you. Asterisk, I saved it all, every word, every image, a digital vault of her betrayal. I started small, testing the waters. I called the boutique one afternoon, knowing she wasn't there, and left a message with her assistant. Tell Claire the landlord needs to discuss the lease. It was a lie, but it rattled her. She came home flustered, muttering about unexpected costs, and I watched her squirm, offering fake sympathy. Then I upped the ante. I emailed one of Michael's clients, an art gallery owner, posing as a concerned colleague, hinting at unprofessional conduct with attached screenshots of Claire's texts, blurred just enough to imply without proving. The gallery canceled his upcoming shoot. He'd feel the pinch soon enough. At home, I kept Claire off balance. I'd ask pointed questions. How's that supplier working out? And watch her fumble, her excuses piling up like loose bricks. She started snapping at me, her guilt bleeding through the cracks. Emily noticed too. She'd ask why Mom was so mad all the time, and I'd shrug, hiding the storm inside. I didn't want my daughter caught in this yet. She was the one pure thing left. But Claire's unraveling was satisfying, a preview of what was coming. I wasn't done, not even close. By now, I'd stopped seeing Claire as my wife. She was a stranger wearing her face, moving through our house like a ghost I couldn't exorcise. The footage from the boutique played in my mind on a loop. Her hands on him, her laughter, the way she leaned into his touch. It wasn't just the act. It was the intimacy, the ease, that gutted me. I'd given her 16 years, built a life brick by brick, and she traded it for stolen moments with a man who'd never know her like I did, or thought I did. I escalated my plan. Michael's business was my first target, his pride, his livelihood. I'd already cost him the gallery job, but that was a warning shot. I dug deeper, found his tax records through a contact at work who owed me a favor. Small discrepancies, nothing blatant, but enough to flag. I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS, attaching copies of his invoices, some fudged, some sloppy. Let them audit him, tie him up in paperwork for months. Meanwhile, I posted vague reviews on his photography site from burner accounts. Unreliable. Overpriced. His bookings dwindled. I pictured him sweating over his espresso, wondering why his charmed life was souring. Claire felt it too, though she didn't know the source. Michael must have complained to her. Her phone buzzed more often, her mood darkening. She'd pace the kitchen, muttering about bad luck, and I'd nod, feigning concern. I planted more seeds. A fake delivery to the boutique with a note. For Claire and Michael, with thanks. Unsigned, cryptic. She blanched when she saw it, stammering that it was a mix-up. I didn't push. I just watched her twist, her lies tangling like vines. She started sleeping less, her eyes shadowed, her temper short. Good. Let her feel the walls closing in. I turned to our shared life next. The house was in both our names, but I'd paid the bulk of the mortgage. I met with a lawyer quietly, a grizzled guy who'd handled a coworker's divorce. He laid out options. Separation, asset division, custody. I didn't want to lose Emily, but I needed leverage. We drafted papers, kept them and signed for now. I also drained our joint savings, not all at once, but in small transfers to a new account she couldn't touch. When she noticed, I'd blame a glitch by time. She'd built her betrayal on my trust. I'd dismantle her security with the same care. One night, she came home late again, her blouse misbuttoned. I couldn't hold back a jab. Rough day at the shop? She froze, then snapped. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, said nothing, let her stew. She stormed off, and I heard her crying in the bathroom later. Part of me, the old part, wanted to comfort her. But that Daniel was gone, buried under her choices. I had a new goal. Make her regret every second she'd spent with him. The unraveling accelerated. Claire's boutique started faltering. Customers dwindled. Her assistant quit after I accidentally let slip Claire was cutting hours. I tipped off a local blog too, suggesting the shop was struggling financially. A snarky post went up. Vintage charm or vintage harm? It wasn't true, not yet, but perception is a beast. Claire ranted about it over dinner, her fork stabbing the air, while Emily shrank into her chair. I murmured condolences, hiding my satisfaction. She was fraying, and I was pulling the threads. Michael's life was crumbling too. The IRS letter arrived. I saw it in his trash when I drove by his house one night, gloves on, careful not to leave prints. His photography gigs dried up. His smug online presence went quiet. I upped the pressure. I mailed his ex-wife a packet. Photos of him with Claire, timestamps, nothing explicit but damning enough. Let her use it for leverage, maybe squeeze him for more alimony. I wanted him cornered, bleeding from every angle. He'd taken my wife, I'd take his stability. At home, Claire grew paranoid. She'd check the windows, lock her phone with a new code I hadn't cracked yet. She accused me of acting strange. Her voice sharp with desperation. I played dumb, kept my tone even. Just worried about you, babe. She didn't buy it, but she couldn't prove anything. I left hints. A receipt from his cafe on the counter. A cryptic note in her purse. Asterisk, does he know? Asterisk, she'd flush, stammer, then retreat. I was a ghost in my own house, haunting her with shadows she couldn't grasp. Emily became my anchor. I shielded her from the worst, taking her to movies, helping with homework, keeping her world steady while Claire's spun apart. But she sensed the tension, asked once, "Are you and Mom fighting?" I hugged her, said, "Grown-up stuff, kiddo. We'll figure it out." I hated lying, but I couldn't drag her into this yet. Claire barely noticed. She was too busy juggling her secrets. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, whispering, "He's on to us, I swear." Michael's voice crackled back. Tense. "Then end it." She didn't. She couldn't. That was her mistake. She'd tethered herself to him, and I'd used that rope to hang them both. My plan was taking shape, a cruel, intricate web. I wasn't done building it yet, but the foundation was solid. They'd feel the full weight soon enough. The air in our house grew thick with unspoken rot. Claire's every move was a performance now. Forced smiles at breakfast, clipped answers over dinner. She thought she was hiding it, but I saw the cracks. The way her hands trembled when her phone lit up. The way she'd glance at me like I was a stranger about to strike. I let her simmer in that unease, feeding it with silence. My plan was a machine now, gears turning, and I was patient enough to let it run its course. She'd built this prison with Michael. I just locked the door. I turned my focus to their connection. The boutique footage had shown me their rhythm, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, like clockwork. I started disrupting it. One Tuesday, I showed up unannounced with lunch, feigning a spontaneous visit. Claire's face drained of color when I walked in. Michael lounging in the back room with a coffee cup. "Thought I'd surprise you," I said, setting the bag down. He stood, awkward, muttering about a client meeting, and bolted. Claire stammered through small talk, her eyes darting to the door. I left without pushing, but the seed was planted. She knew I could appear anytime. Next, I targeted their sanctuary, his house. I'd watched it enough to know its weak points. An old lock on the side gate, a backyard shielded by overgrown trees. Late one night, I slipped in, wearing dark clothes and gloves. I wasn't there to destroy, not yet, just to unsettle. I rearranged things. Flipped patio chairs upside down, moved a potted plant to the driveway, left a single glove, mine but untraceable, on his porch. Petty, maybe, but it worked. Claire came home the next day rattled, saying Michael thought someone was messing with him. I shrugged. Weird neighborhood, I guess. Her paranoia deepened, and I savored it. I dug into their past next. Claire's phone clone had old messages. Months of flirting, plans, promises. One stood out. Michael joking about a weekend escape to a cabin he owned upstate. I found it through property records. A rustic place an hour away, perfect for their little trysts. I drove there on a Saturday, Emily at a friend's, Claire working. The cabin was empty, but signs of them were everywhere. Her scarf on a chair, his camera on the table, a half-empty wine bottle. My chest tightened, but I stayed focused. I didn't trash it, I left a mark. Carved into the wooden porch rail. Small but visible. Asterisk, she's mine. Asterisk, let him puzzle that out. Claire's unraveling was beautiful in its chaos. She started forgetting things, Emily's school events, grocery lists, even her own lies. One night, she snapped at me over nothing, her voice shrill. "Why are you always watching me?" I leaned back, calm as stone. Just making sure you're okay. She stormed off, but I heard her crying later, muffled sobs through the bathroom door. She was breaking, and I hadn't even shown my hand. Michael was her lifeline, and I was cutting it, strand by strand. They didn't know how deep this went, but they'd feel it soon. The cabin carving hit its mark. Claire came home the next evening jittery, her phone clutched like a lifeline. She didn't mention it, but I overheard her later, whispering to Michael, "Someone was there. We need to be careful." His reply was terse, paranoid. "I'll handle it." I smiled into my coffee. Let him try. I'd already mapped their next move. They'd cling tighter, thinking it would save them. That's when I'd strike hardest. I wasn't just dismantling their affair. I was rewriting their reality. I shifted to Michael's world again. His photography was his identity, so I went after it with surgical precision. I'd kept screenshots from Claire's phone, intimate shots she'd sent him, moments I'd never unsee. I didn't use them directly. Too messy. Instead, I created an anonymous email and sent his biggest client, a wedding planner, a vague warning, "Ask Michael about his side projects." Attached was a blurred image, just suggestive enough to raise questions. The planner dropped him within days, citing scheduling conflicts. His online reviews tanked next, thanks to more burner accounts. He was bleeding and I wasn't stopping. Claire felt the ripple. She'd rant about unfair competition at the boutique, oblivious that I'd nudged her suppliers too. A quiet call here, a hinted delay there. Her shipments slowed, her shelves thinned. Customers complained, and she'd come home drained, snapping at Emily over trivial things. My daughter's eyes would meet mine, confused, and I'd steer her away, shielding her from the fallout. Claire didn't notice. She was too busy texting Michael. Their messages shorter now, laced with tension. Asterisk, "What's happening?" Asterisk, she'd write. "I don't know," he'd reply. I did. I planted more chaos. One night, I swapped her car keys with an old set that didn't work. She spent an hour panicking, late for work, while I helped her search. Another day, I left a photo on the kitchen counter. An old one of us on vacation, but I'd scribbled asterisk, "Remember," asterisk across her face. She stared at it, pale, then threw it out without a word. I kept her guessing, off balance, her confidence eroding. She started drinking more. Wine glasses piled up in the sink, her breath sharp at night. I let her drown in it. The real twist came when I hacked their narrative. Michael had a small exhibit coming up, a last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation. I RSVP'd under a fake name, showed up early, and slipped a USB into the gallery's projector system. When his slideshow started, it wasn't just landscapes. Interspersed were grainy stills from the boutique camera, their silhouettes unmistakable. The crowd murmured, confused, then appalled. Michael fumbled to shut it down, Claire nowhere in sight. I left before the chaos peaked, my pulse steady. They'd know it was me soon, but not yet. The exhibit disaster broke something in them. Claire came home that night wild-eyed, her voice trembling as she demanded, "Were you there? Did you do this?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "Do what?" I was at home with Emily. She had no proof and it drove her mad. She paced, muttering about someone out to get us, her hands twisting her hair. I offered her tea, my tone soft, and she slapped the mug away, the crash echoing through the kitchen. Emily peeked from the hallway, and I sent her to bed, promising it was just Mom being tired. Claire didn't care. She was spiraling, and I was the eye of the storm. Michael called her an hour later. I listened through the wall, his voice a frantic hiss. "We're done. This is too much." She begged him to stay, her pleas raw, pathetic. "I need you," she said, and I felt a cold satisfaction. He hung up, and she crumpled, sobbing into the couch. I didn't comfort her. I stood in the doorway, invisible, letting her taste the isolation she'd earned. He'd abandoned her just as I'd planned. His ego couldn't handle the heat, and I turned it up to scorch. I didn't stop there. The boutique was next. I'd already weakened it, but now I went for the kill. I contacted her landlord, posing as a concerned neighbor, claiming odd activity after hours, strange visitors, late-night lights. He grumbled about lease violations, promised to investigate. Then I tipped off a health inspector, anonymous again, about unsanitary storage. The shop got slapped with a fine and a temporary closure notice. Claire found out the next morning, her scream waking the house. She blamed bad luck. But I saw the fear in her eyes. Her world was shrinking and I was the architect. I kept Emily steady through it all. She'd ask why Mom was so sad, and I'd distract her with board games, movies, anything to keep her safe. Claire barely noticed her own daughter now, too lost in her collapse. I took over the parenting, the cooking, the comm center of our fracturing home. Claire would watch me sometimes, suspicion flickering, but she couldn't pin me down. I was too careful, too clean. Every move was calculated, nothing traced back, nothing provable. That weekend, I visited the cabin again. Michael hadn't been back. I checked, but I wanted to twist the knife. I left a new message, painted in red across the front door. Asterisk, you lost her. Asterisk, simple, direct, a gut punch he'd feel when he returned. I drove home under a starless sky, my mind clear. Claire was alone now, Michael retreating, and I was just getting started. They'd thought their bond was unbreakable. I'd shown them it was glass. Claire hit bottom the next week. The boutique's closure notice came with a stack of bills she couldn't pay. Her savings were gone, siphoned by my quiet transfers. She confronted me, waving bank statements, her voice hoarse. "Where's the money, Daniel?" I played dumb, said I'd look into it, knowing she'd find nothing. She'd trusted me with our finances for years. Her oversight was my weapon. She called the bank, frantic, but they stonewalled her, new account, new rules. She slammed the phone down, tears streaking her face, and I watched, silent, unyielding. Michael ghosted her completely. His phone went to voicemail, his social media dark. I'd heard through a mutual contact he'd left town, chasing a gig somewhere else, tail between his legs. Claire didn't know. He'd cut her off without a word, leaving her to drown alone. She'd sit by the window, staring at nothing, her phone lifeless in her lap. I'd walk by, casual, and she'd flinch, like I was a predator circling. She wasn't wrong. I'd stripped her of him, her business, her stability. Now came the personal ruin. I turned to our social circle. Claire had always been the charming one, the life of every party. I started small, dropped hints to friends about her stress, her distractions. Then I invited a few over, let them see her disheveled, snapping at me over spilled wine. They exchanged looks, whispered later about trouble at home. I fed the narrative. She's not herself lately. Soon, invites dried up. She was too unpredictable, they said. Her isolation grew, a cage I'd built with their own judgment. She'd lost her lover, her work, now her friends. Emily became my shield and my sword. I took her to school events, church picnics, places Claire used to shine. People asked where she was. I'd sigh, "She's been busy." They'd nod, assuming the worst. Emily thrived under my care, her grades up, her smile back. Claire noticed once and muttered, "You're turning her against me." I didn't respond. She'd done that herself. I just kept being the steady father, the reliable one, while she faded into the background of her own life. One night, she broke. She cornered me in the garage, her eyes wild, hair a mess. "I know it's you," she hissed. "All of this, it's you." I leaned against my workbench, calm. "What's me, Claire? You're not making sense." She lunged, shoving me, screaming about Michael, the shop, the money. I caught her wrists, held her still, my voice low. "You did this. Not me." She collapsed, sobbing, and I let her fall. She had no proof, no fight left. I'd won this round, but the final blow was coming. Claire's surrender didn't satisfy me. It fueled me. She'd curled into herself, a shadow of the woman I'd married, but I wasn't done. She'd taken my trust, my peace, and twisted it with Michael. I'd take everything she had left. The house was my next move. I'd consulted the lawyer again, finalized the separation papers. I didn't serve them yet, I wanted her to feel the ground shift first. I met with a realtor quietly, listed the place under a shell name. Offers came fast. It was a good market. I picked one, cash deal, quick close. Claire didn't know her home was slipping away. I staged the collapse. One morning, I packed Emily's things, told her we were visiting Grandma for a few days. Claire barely noticed, slumped over coffee, her eyes hollow. While we were gone, movers arrived, hired under a fake job order. They took her precious antiques, her boutique inventory she'd stored in the garage, even her clothes. I told them it was a full clear-out, paid extra for silence. When she called me, hysterical, I acted shocked. "What do you mean, gone?" She thought it was a break-in, called the cops, but I'd covered my tracks, no evidence, just confusion. The realtor closed the sale that week. I rerouted the funds to my new account, left Claire's name off everything. When I brought Emily back, the locks were changed, new owners already moving in. Claire stood on the lawn, screaming at me, neighbors watching. "Where's our house, Daniel?" I shrugged, cold as ice. "Guess we lost it. Bank must have foreclosed." A lie, but she had no way to check. Her credit was trashed, thanks to a few forgotten bills I'd let lapse in her name. Emily clung to me, scared, and I soothed her. "We'll be okay, kiddo." Claire had nothing left. No money, no home, no daughter's trust. Friends wouldn't take her calls. Michael was a ghost. I rented a new place for me and Emily, cozy hours. Claire crashed with a cousin, I heard, begging for scraps. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. She'd feel this for years. Every empty day a reminder of what she'd thrown away. I'd rebuilt my life. Hers was ash. That night, I sat on my new porch, Emily asleep inside. I thought of the cabin, the boutique, every step I'd taken. Revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was precise. A bridge I designed to collapse under her weight. She'd never see me coming until it was too late, and now it was. I exhaled, the weight lifting. 5 more moves to go, and I'd be free. The new house felt like a fresh start. A clean slate for me and Emily. It was smaller, simpler, but ours, free of Claire's shadow. Emily adjusted fast, her laughter filling the rooms as we painted her walls a bright blue. She'd ask about Mom sometimes, her voice small, and I'd say, "She's figuring things out, kiddo. We've got each other." It wasn't a lie, not entirely. Claire was out there, scrambling, while I tightened the last knots of my plan. I'd taken her home, her business, her lover. Now I'd take her identity, her past, piece by piece. Claire's cousin called me a week later, voice tight with worry. "She's a mess, Daniel. Says you stole everything." I kept my tone neutral. She made her choices. I'm just protecting Emily. The cousin didn't push. Claire's story sounded unhinged, even to family. I'd planted too many doubts, left too clean a trail. She was unraveling publicly now, ranting to anyone who'd listen about conspiracies, about me. People nodded politely, then turned away. I'd made her the town pariah, a cautionary tale whispered over coffee. I went after her memories next. She'd kept photo albums, mementos from our early years, first dates, Emily's birth, vacations. They'd been in storage, but I'd claimed them during the move. One night, I spread them out, a life I'd once believed in. Then I burned them page by page in the backyard fire pit. The flames ate her smile, our smiles, until nothing remained but ash. I mailed her a single charred corner, our wedding photo half gone with no note. Let her guess. She'd know it was me, feel the loss like a physical wound. Emily thrived, oblivious to the war I'd waged. I enrolled her in art classes, something Claire had always promised but never delivered. Her sketches covered the fridge, bright bursts of color that anchored me. Claire tried calling once, begging to see her, but I blocked the number. "Not yet," I told the lawyer who drafted a custody motion. I'd wait until Claire was at her lowest, then take that too. She'd lost the right to our daughter when she chose Michael, and I'd make sure the courts saw it my way. Claire's final lifeline was her reputation, fragile as it was. I shattered it. I'd saved one last email, her confession to Michael about hating the routine with me, calling our life suffocating. I forwarded it to her old friends, her cousin, even her pastor, with a simple note. Thought you should know who she really is. The fallout was swift. Text stopped. Doors closed. She was alone now, truly alone. Her charm buried under the truth I'd exposed. I didn't need to see her face to know it hurt. I felt it in the silence. Weeks passed, and Claire's absence became a quiet victory. Emily and I settled into a rhythm. School runs, movie nights, a life untainted by her mother's lies. I'd hear rumors through the grapevine. Claire couch surfing, picking up odd jobs, her pride long gone. She tried calling Emily's school once, but I'd updated the contact list me only. She was a ghost to us now, her influence erased. My revenge wasn't loud or flashy. It was a slow bleed, and she was running dry. I revisited Michael next. He'd slunk back to town, tail between his legs, after his out-of-state gig flopped. I'd kept tabs. His ex-wife had dragged him to court, armed with my photos, and won a bigger settlement. He was broke, living in a rented room above a bar. I didn't need to confront him. I'd already won, but I couldn't resist a parting shot. I mailed him a print, a blurry still from the boutique footage, Claire's hand on his chest, with "She's gone" scrawled across it. No return address, no trace. Let him stew in that failure, knowing he'd lost her too. Claire's last stand came unexpectedly. She showed up at my office one afternoon, gaunt, eyes red-rimmed. "You've destroyed me," she rasped, clutching a crumpled photo, the burned wedding scrap. I leaned back in my chair, calm. "You destroyed us first." She lunged, clawing at my desk, paper scattering. Security hauled her out, her screams echoing down the hall. Colleagues stared, whispered, and I shrugged it off. Ex-wife trouble. The story spread, cementing her as the unhinged one. I filed a restraining order that day, another nail in her coffin. Emily asked about it later, hearing whispers at school. I sat her down, kept it simple. "Mom's having a hard time, but we're okay. She can't hurt us." She nodded, trusting me, and I hugged her tight. Claire's chaos wouldn't touch my daughter. I'd made sure of that. The lawyer called that night. Custody papers were ready. I told him to serve them soon. Claire had no home, no income, no case. She'd lose Emily legally, just as she'd lost her practically. I slept well that night, the first time in months. The house was quiet, Emily's soft snores drifting through the wall. Claire was a memory I'd torched, Michael a footnote I'd erased. My revenge was a tapestry now, woven tight, every thread in place. 3 moves left, and I'd seal it forever. The custody hearing loomed, and I prepared like it was a bridge design, every angle covered, no weak points. Claire had no chance, but I didn't leave it to fate. I documented her decline. The boutique's collapse, the restraining order, witness statements from neighbors about her erratic behavior. The lawyer smiled, said it was airtight. I wanted full custody, no visitation. She'd forfeited that right. Emily deserved stability, not a mother who'd traded her for fleeting thrills. Claire could claw all she wanted. She'd find no foothold. She showed up to the hearing a wreck. Unwashed hair, thrift store clothes, her voice trembling as she pleaded her case. "He's taken everything," she told the judge, pointing at me. "I'm her mother." I sat still, letting my lawyer dismantle her. No job, no home, a paper trail of instability. The judge barely blinked, ruling in my favor within an hour. Emily was mine legally, irrevocably. Claire sobbed as she left, her cousin dragging her away. I felt no pity, only closure. I celebrated quietly that night, cooking Emily's favorite pasta, watching her chatter about school. She didn't know the details, didn't need to. I'd shielded her from the ugliness, built her a world where Claire's betrayal couldn't reach. Friends congratulated me later, slapping my back, saying I'd dodged a bullet. They didn't know the half of it, how I'd turned that bullet back on her, watched it tear through her life. I smiled, sipped my beer, kept my triumph private. Claire vanished after that. Rumors said she'd moved to a cheap apartment across town, working nights at a diner. I didn't care enough to check. She'd call sometimes, blocked numbers leaving voicemails I deleted unheard. Her voice didn't matter anymore. She was noise, static I'd tuned out. Michael stayed gone too. Last I heard, he'd sold his camera gear, scraping by. They'd crumbled, separately, under the weight I'd stacked. My revenge wasn't done, though, 2 final threads to tie off. I framed it that night, the custody order, hung it in my office next to Emily's latest drawing. A reminder, I'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. Claire had thought she could rewrite our story. I'd burned her draft and written my own. The house hummed with peace, Emily's laughter my reward. I dismantled her world, left her nothing but echoes. One more move for her, one for him, and I'd be free. Claire's fall was complete, but I wanted her to feel it forever. She'd rebuilt a sliver of a life. Diner job, cramped apartment, a fragile thread of hope. Couldn't let it stand. I'd kept one last relic from her phone. A voice memo she'd sent Michael, laughing about starting over with him, mocking me as boring, predictable Daniel. It was venom, pure and sharp, and I'd saved it for this. I cleaned it up, stripped the context, and mailed copies to her new coworkers, her landlord, her cousin, anonymous, of course. No note, just her voice, dripping with disdain. The fallout was swift. Her cousin cut ties, calling her toxic. The diner fired her, too much drama, they said. Her landlord evicted her, citing tenant complaints. She was back to nothing, her fragile restart snuffed out. I pictured her alone, hearing her own words echo, knowing they'd undone her again. It wasn't enough to ruin her once. I wanted her to taste it every time she clawed back. She'd never escape the cage I'd built, her own choices, my execution. Michael's turn came next. He'd faded, but I tracked him down, working odd jobs in a neighboring county, living in a trailer. I didn't need much, just a nudge. I sent his ex-wife one final gift. A forged letter, his handwriting mimicked, hinting he'd hidden assets during their divorce. She took it to court and they reopened the case. He'd lose the little he had left. Pennies, pride, peace. I imagined him cursing, blaming Claire, never seeing my hand. He'd been her catalyst. I'd made him her mirror, both broken beyond repair. Emily and I moved forward. She joined a soccer team, her ponytail bouncing as she scored her first goal. I cheered, louder than anyone, my chest swelling. Friends invited us to barbecues, vacations. Our life expanded while Claire's shrank. I'd hear whispers about her sometimes, a cautionary tale, but I didn't linger. She was a footnote, Michael a smudge. My revenge was a symphony now, every note played, the final chord ringing. One last act and I'd close the book. I stood in the kitchen that night, washing dishes, Emily humming upstairs. The weight was gone. 16 years of trust, betrayal, vengeance, distilled into this quiet moment. I torn them down, built myself back. Claire's voice memo, Michael's forged letter. They were my parting shots, ensuring they'd never rise. I dried my hands, smiled. Tomorrow was Emily's game. That's what mattered now. The final act was simple, elegant. A bow on the chaos I'd wrought. Claire's birthday rolled around March 18th, a date I'd once circled with care. She'd be 41, alone, scraping by in some nowhere motel, if the rumors held. I sent her a package, unmarked. A single photo, our family at Emily's 5th birthday, Claire beaming between us. On the back, in my handwriting, asterisk, you had this. Asterisk, no explanation, no threat, just the truth sharp as a blade. Let her open it, see what she'd lost, feel the weight of her choices one last time. I didn't need to know her reaction. I'd already won. Michael got his too. I'd found his trailer's address through a PI friend. A favor called in. I mailed him a print of that boutique still. Claire's hand on him. She's gone, still scrawled across it, tucked inside a blank card. A reminder of his role, his failure. A ghost to haunt whatever scraps of life he'd patched together. He'd open it, flinch, maybe toss it, but it'd linger. They'd both carry me in their shadows. A quiet specter they couldn't shake. Emily and I celebrated that day instead. I took her to an amusement park, her laughter ringing as we rode roller coasters. ate cotton candy until our fingers stuck. She didn't know it was Claire's birthday. She didn't need to. We were a unit now, whole without her. Friends texted later, asking us to dinner, and I said yes. Our circle had grown, warm, alive. Claire and Michael were footnotes in a story I'd rewritten. Their chapters closed. That night, I sat on the porch, a beer in hand, the sky clear above. The packages were delivered, tracking confirmed it. I pictured Claire's trembling hands, Michael's clenched jaw, the silence that'd follow. My revenge wasn't blood or screams. It was precision, a life dismantled, a lesson carved deep. I'd taken everything, her home, her child, her love, her name, and left her with nothing but regret. Michael, too, reduced to a shell. They'd betrayed me together. I'd buried them apart. I finished my drink, went inside, locked the door. Emily slept upstairs, safe, mine. The house was quiet, steady, a bridge I'd built to withstand any storm. Claire and Michael were out there, broken, but I was here, whole. I planned 15 steps, executed them all, and now I was done. The furnace in me cooled, the machine stilled. Tomorrow was a new day, and I'd live it free.